There was a boy who never wanted to be a soldier. His name has been lost to time, erased by the same history that celebrated the generals and kings. He was 14, maybe 15. His hands were made for holding plows, not bows. For planting rice, not taking lives. But when the recruiters came to his village, they did not ask what he wanted. They did not care that his mother begged them to leave her only son. They did not care that his father had already died in the emperor's last war. They took him anyway, gave him a bow he barely knew how to use, told him he was fighting for glory, for honor, for the empire. But the boy knew the truth. He was not fighting for glory. He was fighting because he had no choice. And on a cold morning, in a field that stretched as far as the eye could see, that boy stood in a line with 19,999 others just like him. Peasants, farmers, sons taken from mothers. And they were about to do something that would change the world forever. They were about to turn the sky black. Do you know what it feels like to watch the sun disappear? Not from clouds, not from night falling, but from arrows. So many arrows that the light itself is swallowed. So many that the air hums with the sound of death flying overhead. So many that when they fall, they do not hit the ground. They hit flesh, bone, steel. They hit everything. And when the screaming stops, when the dust settles, when the smoke clears, an empire that had stood for 400 years is lying dead in the mud. This is not a story about heroes. This is a story about a massacre. A calculated, brutal, horrifying massacre that ended a dynasty and proved that war is not won by the bravest or the strongest. It is won by whoever is willing to turn human beings into machines. And on that day, 20,000 archers became the most efficient killing machine the world had ever seen. You need to understand what an empire looks like when it believes it cannot fall. For 4 centuries, the dynasty had ruled with an iron fist. Its borders stretched across mountains and deserts, rivers and plains. Its armies had crushed rebellions, conquered kingdoms, and brought entire nations to their knees. And at the heart of that power was the cavalry, the emperor's legendary horsemen. They were not just soldiers. They were a symbol, clad in armor that gleamed like silver, riding horses bred for speed and strength, trained from childhood to fight as one unstoppable force. They moved like thunder across the battlefield, trampling infantry, scattering archers, breaking the will of anyone who dared to stand against them. Generals feared them. Kings paid tribute to avoid them. And for 400 years, no one had found a way to stop them. Until a rebel general looked at a field of peasants and saw something the empire never did. He saw potential. The general was not a nobleman. He had not been trained in the emperor's academies. He had risen from nothing, fought his way through the ranks, watched men die for a system that did not care about them. And he had learned something that the empire, in all its arrogance, had forgotten. Wars are not won by individuals. They are won by systems, by tactics, by turning chaos into order. The empire relied on its cavalry because cavalry required skill, training, and years of practice. A knight on horseback was a weapon that took a lifetime to forge. But an archer? An archer could be trained in weeks. And if you gave that archer the right system, the right formation, the right rhythm, you could turn a farmer into a killer. You could turn 20,000 farmers into a storm. The general gathered his rebel army in secret, far from the emperor's eyes. Most of them had never fought before. They were blacksmiths and bakers, fishermen and field workers. They knew hunger better than they knew war. But they knew anger too. They had watched the empire take their crops, their money, their children. They had watched the cavalry ride through their villages, trampling anyone who did not bow fast enough. And now, they were being given a chance to fight back. The general did not give them swords. He did not train them to charge. He gave them bows. Simple wooden bows, cheap and easy to make. And he taught them one thing. Not how to aim, not how to hit a target, but how to shoot together, how to release at the same time, how to turn themselves into a single, devastating weapon. He called it the volley, and it would change everything. For weeks, they practiced. Stand in formation. Knock your arrow. Draw. Hold. Release. Again, and again, and again. It did not matter if you missed. It did not matter if your arrow flew wide. Because when 20,000 arrows fly at once, some of them will always hit. The general taught them to shoot in waves. The first line releases, then steps back. The second line releases, then steps back. The third line releases. By the time the third line has fired, the first line is ready again. An endless cycle. A river of arrows that never stops flowing. The peasants did not understand why this mattered. They did not understand tactics or strategy, but they trusted the general, because he was one of them, because he had promised them that if they followed his orders, they would not just survive, they would win. The emperor heard about the rebellion, of course, but he did not take it seriously. Peasants with bows? It was almost insulting. He sent his cavalry, 5,000 of his finest horsemen, led by a general who had never lost a battle. They rode out with banners flying, armor shining, confident that this would be over before noon. They had faced armies before, real armies, trained soldiers with spears and shields. These were just farmers. It would be a slaughter. They were right, but not in the way they expected. The two forces met on an open plain. No trees, no hills, no cover, just flat ground stretching in every direction. Perfect terrain for cavalry. The worst possible terrain for archers. Or so the empire thought. The rebel general positioned his 20,000 archers in a massive rectangular formation, 10 lines deep, 2,000 men across. They stood silent, bows in hand, waiting. The imperial cavalry saw them and laughed. Archers in the open? With no stakes, no ditches, no defenses? This was suicide. The cavalry formed up a wall of steel and horseflesh and began their charge. The ground shook. The thunder of hooves echoed across the plain. 5,000 men and 5,000 horses, moving as one, closing the distance at terrifying speed. The archers did not move. They stood perfectly still, bows raised, waiting for the order. The boy with the plow-worn hands stood in the third line. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He could see the cavalry now, close enough to see the faces of the men who were coming to kill him, close enough to see the hatred in their eyes. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to drop his bow and flee. But the man next to him, an old farmer who had lost 3 sons to the empire, put a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Hold, just hold. Trust the general." The cavalry was 200 yards away, then 100, then 50, and then the general raised his hand and shouted a single word. Loose. 2,000 arrows launched into the sky, not aimed at individual riders, aimed at the sky itself. A wave of wood and iron arcing up, 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 blotting out the sun. The cavalry did not slow. They had seen arrows before. Armor could stop arrows. Shields could block them. They charged forward, confident, fearless. And then the arrows began to fall. Not one at a time, not in scattered volleys, but all at once. A rain of death that covered the entire front line of the charge. Arrows punched through helmets, through shoulder plates, through the necks of horses. Riders screamed as their mounts collapsed beneath them. Men were thrown forward, crushed under the weight of their own armor. And before the first wave had even finished falling, the second line of archers released. Another 2,000 arrows. Then the third line. Then the fourth. The sky turned black. That is not poetry. That is not an exaggeration. Witnesses who survived, soldiers who watched from the edges of the battlefield, they all said the same thing. The sun disappeared. The sky became a solid mass of arrows, so many that you could not see through them. And the sound, not the twang of bowstrings, not the whistle of shafts, but a roar, a continuous, unending roar as 20,000 arrows flew and fell and flew again. The cavalry charge shattered. Horses stumbled over the bodies of other horses. Riders tried to turn, to retreat, but there was no room. They were packed too tightly, moving too fast. And the arrows kept coming, wave after wave after wave. Men who had trained their entire lives to fight, who had won 100 battles, who had believed themselves invincible, they died screaming, unable to fight back, unable to even see their enemy through the storm of wood and iron. The imperial general, realizing the charge had failed, tried to rally his men. He shouted orders and tried to organize a retreat. But his voice was drowned out by the roar of arrows and the screaming of dying men and horses. An arrow took him through the throat. He fell from his saddle, choking on his own blood, and was trampled by his own cavalry as they tried to flee. The rebel general did not stop. He did not give the order to cease fire. The volleys continued for 10 minutes, 15, 20, until the archers' arms burned, until their fingers bled from pulling bowstrings, until the ground was covered in a carpet of arrows so thick you could not see the grass beneath. And when the order finally came to stop, when the last arrow had been loosed and the last bowstring had fallen silent, the plain was a graveyard. 5,000 men had charged. Less than 300 survived, and those who did survive were broken. They stumbled away on foot, their horses dead, their armor abandoned, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. They had not been defeated in combat. They had been erased, deleted from existence by a force they could not fight, could not stop, could not even comprehend. And the message was clear. The Empire's greatest weapon, the cavalry that had been unbeatable for 4 centuries, was obsolete. One rebel general and 20,000 peasants had just rewritten the rules of war. News of the massacre spread like wildfire. Other rebel groups, inspired by the victory, rose up across the empire. They adopted the same tactics. Archers in massive formations, firing in volleys, turning the sky black. The emperor sent more cavalry. They died. He sent infantry. They died too, unable to reach the archers before the arrows cut them down. He sent his best generals, his most experienced commanders. It did not matter. The system was too efficient, too brutal, too perfect. Within months, the empire's armies were in retreat. Within a year, the capital was under siege. And within 2 years, the 400-year dynasty collapsed. The emperor was captured, stripped of his crown, and executed in the same field where his cavalry had been slaughtered. The dynasty that had seemed eternal, that had believed itself blessed by heaven, was gone, ended not by a rival king or a foreign invasion, but by farmers with bows. The boy who never wanted to be a soldier survived the battle. But he was not the same. He had stood in that field and watched the sky turn black. He had released his arrows into the air, knowing that somewhere below they were ending lives. He had heard the screaming, seen the bodies piled so high that men were climbing over corpses to escape. And he had realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. War is not about courage. It is not about honor or glory or righteousness. War is about efficiency, about systems, about turning human beings into tools and using those tools to kill as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time. The boy went home after the war ended, but his village was gone, burned during one of the empire's retaliations. His mother was dead. His home was ash. The empire had taken everything from him, and the rebellion, the cause he had fought for, had given him nothing in return except nightmares and the memory of the sky turning black. The general who had invented the volley tactic became a legend. Historians would write about his genius, his innovation, his role in toppling a dynasty. But they would not write about the cost. They would not write about the 20,000 archers who had been used and discarded. They would not write about the villages that were destroyed in the chaos that followed the empire's collapse. They would not write about the boy who went home to find nothing left. Because history does not care about the tools. It only cares about the results. And the result was that medieval warfare was changed forever. Across the continent, armies abandoned their reliance on heavy cavalry. They began training archers, building longbows, developing new volley tactics. The age of the knight was ending. The age of the archer had begun, and it had all started with a massacre so complete, so overwhelming, that the sun itself had been blotted out. But here is what they do not tell you in the history books. The volley tactic was not just a military innovation. It was a revelation about the nature of power. For centuries, warfare had been dominated by elites, knights who trained for years, cavalry that required wealth and resources, soldiers who were born into military families. War was the domain of the few. But the volley tactic proved that you did not need elite soldiers. You did not need years of training. You just needed numbers. You needed ordinary people, organized and directed, turned into a system. And once that system was in place, once those ordinary people realized they could stand together and bring down the powerful, everything changed. Not just on the battlefield, but in society. The empire had fallen because it believed that power came from the top, from the emperor, from the nobles, from the cavalry. But the rebellion had proven that power comes from the bottom, from the masses, from the people who are willing to stand together and fight. And once that idea was unleashed, it could not be put back. The dynasty's collapse did not bring peace. It brought chaos. Warlords carved up the empire's territory. Rival factions fought for control. The land that had been united for 400 years fractured into dozens of warring states. And in every one of those conflicts, archers played a central role. The volley tactic was copied, refined, and improved. Some armies trained archers to fire even faster. Others developed new types of arrows, designed to pierce specific kinds of armor. The storm that had been unleashed on that plain, the storm of arrows that had turned the sky black, it became the standard. And with it came a level of carnage that medieval warfare had never seen before. Battles that once lasted days now ended in minutes. Armies that once numbered in the thousands were wiped out before they could even engage. The age of chivalry, of single combat, of honor on the battlefield, it was over, replaced by something colder, more mechanical, more efficient. And yet, the boy who survived, the one who never wanted to be a soldier, understood something that the generals and historians did not. The volley tactic had won the battle, but it had also destroyed something. It had turned war into a factory, a production line where human beings were the raw material and death was the product. It had stripped away the illusion that there was anything noble about combat. It had revealed war for what it truly was, a machine that consumes lives and produces nothing but grief. He spent the rest of his days wandering, telling anyone who would listen about what he had seen. Not the glory, not the victory, but the cost, the screaming, the bodies. The sky is turning black. Most people did not want to hear it. They wanted the heroic version, the story of the rebellion that toppled an empire. But the boy insisted on telling the truth, because he believed that if people truly understood what war was, maybe they would stop celebrating it. Maybe they would stop sending their children to die in fields far from home. Maybe they would find another way. He was wrong, of course. They did not stop. The wars continued. The volleys continued. The sky turned black again and again, in field after field, battle after battle, century after century. Because once a system is created, once a method is proven effective, it will be used. No matter the cost, no matter the suffering. The volley tactic spread beyond the continent. Other nations adopted it, modified it, made it their own. And everywhere it went, it brought the same result. Massive casualties. Entire armies destroyed in minutes. And the slow, creeping realization that the individual no longer mattered on the battlefield. You were not a warrior. You were not a soldier. You were a unit in a formation, a tool in a system. And when the order came to loose, you lost. And somewhere, far away, people died. People you would never see. People whose names you would never know. People who were just like you. Farmers and bakers and sons taken from mothers. All of you, on both sides, caught in a machine that did not care who lived or who died, as long as the arrows kept flying. Today, military historians study the battle. They analyze the tactics. They debate the exact number of arrows fired, the precise formation of the archers, the speed of the volleys. They call it a turning point, a revolution in military strategy. And they are right. But they are also missing the point. Because the real story is not about tactics. It is about what happens when ordinary people are organized into a system designed to kill. It is about the moment when war stopped being about skill or bravery and became about efficiency. It is about the day the sky turned black and a dynasty fell and the world realized that the age of heroes was over. The age of machines had begun, and the machines were made of flesh and bone and fear. 20,000 archers, 20,000 boys who never wanted to be soldiers, 20,000 lives that were used to end a dynasty. Some of them went home. Most of them did not. But all of them, whether they lived or died, paid the price for that victory. They carried the weight of what they had done, the screams they had caused, the lives they had ended. The sky had turned black. This is the story history tried to sanitize. The story of a massacre that was celebrated as a triumph, of peasants who were turned into weapons and then forgotten, of a dynasty that fell not because it was weak, but because someone figured out how to turn human beings into a storm. And the storm did not care about honor. It did not care about glory. It cared only about one thing: winning, no matter the cost, no matter the suffering, no matter how many mothers would stand on the edges of villages, clutching wooden tokens, whispering the names of sons who would never come home. The empire fell, the dynasty ended, and the sky turned black. That is the truth, not the legend, not the sanitized version. The truth. And it is a truth that should make us pause, should make us think, should make us ask whether the cost of victory is ever worth the price that is paid by those who are turned into tools. Because that boy, the one who never wanted to be a soldier, knew the answer. And he spent the rest of his life trying to tell us. But we were not listening. We never are.